In and out of the Beltway, from large cities to small towns to the rural heartland, from sea to shining sea. This is Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.
Welcome back to another show of Inside the News with Wayman, Brunson, and Vernuccio. Oh, we got another jam-packed one for you this week. Let's say hello to the guys. Ben Brunson, how you doing in beautiful sunny Florida?
I'm doing great. It's nice and cool for a couple of days down here, but we're enjoying the last of the winter.
Oh, yeah. Well, we would take your cool because it's warmer than what we have in sub-freezing temperatures and snow here in Missouri. Frank, what's going on in New York?
We're not having winter. We're having another ice age. Where's that global warming they've been promising us?
Oh, that's Kathy Hochul is what we're talking about. We're going to talk about them in the third segment here. But first, Frank, you see the sheet here. We've got so much to talk about. I'll let you do player's choice. Go.
Well, let's talk about Doge exposing corruption. And the response I don't think many people expected was rather than people, the press in particular, getting aggravated about all the corruption that's been exposed, the media is aggravated at Doge and President Trump for exposing the corruption in the first place. The latest in all of this is that we find that 4.7 trillion, can I say that again? $4.7 trillion is an untraceable budget line, which means we don't know where the money actually went. 4.7 trillion. Now, the fascinating thing about all of this is that when we talk about this amount of money, it is clear when we look at things going all the way back to the first Obama administration, when money was sent to Solyndra for no reason whatsoever that we can discern, supposedly for green energy. The money just seemed to be a pass along to Democrat donors and progressive causes. The fact is, the left has used your tax dollars and the federal budget as a piggy bank for their candidacies, for their campaigns, and their causes. And yet the media is outraged, not at that, but at the fact that the Trump administration has exposed this grand theft of taxpayer dollars.
And you wonder why the taxes go up because they just want more money to funnel on through. I'll tell you what, Ben, go.
Well, look, I think Frank hit the nail on the head. Look, we have learned a couple of points I'm going to make. First, we've only gotten to the tip of the iceberg. So there is much worse to come out. But what we can say is a handful of conclusions can be drawn. One is that every department, every source of money engaged in this redirection of funds into woke progressive globalist causes and into NGOs, which were formed by Democratic operatives and connected Democrats, almost universally formed by that. And this goes back certainly to the first Obama term and the start of that term. NGOs predate that, but the real abuse of NGOs were NGOs were being formed by Democratic operatives specifically to get money funneled into them, where the accounting becomes obtuse, becomes invisible, opaque. You can no longer track what's going on. This is where the real scandal lies, because you're going to find everyone has always scratched their head why someone like AOC, who's dumber than a box of rocks, who clearly had no net worth the day she joined Congress as a ex-bartender, suddenly shows a multi-million-dollar net worth, a few years into her run in Congress. And that's just, exemplary of what happens for anyone who becomes remotely powerful within Congress. How does that happen? Well, you're going to find that when they go after the NGOs, you're going to start seeing where all this money gets siphoned off, it gets laundered, it gets kicked back to individuals who make massive pay or get funded in one way or the other, much the way that Chelsea Clinton makes millions a year being the head of the Clinton Foundation. You're going to find that's what's been going on here. in spades. It is critical, in my opinion, for the Department of Justice to create some large teams that are dedicated to investigating these NGOs. This is how you removed all this money out of the government and into sources that, as I said, were opaque from government scrutiny, opaque from the GAO, opaque from accountability. And this is where the criminal investigations have to start to focus, because it is going to be very, very ugly. And the numbers that we're talking about, we're not talking about, as Donald Trump has said, we're not talking about hundreds of millions. We're talking about hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars that have been siphoned off in this way to fund progressive and connected Democrats. And we've already shown that USAID money went to fund the insurrection against Donald Trump during his first term. We're just at the tip of the iceberg. Every department has been doing this. So they're going to dig in the Department of Energy and find that tens of billions went to these NGOs and into these progressive causes. All of this unauthorized by Congress. It is all illegal, and it is absolutely a threat to our Constitution, to our republic. So the crackdown on this has to be hard. People have to be prosecuted and sent to prison over what has been going on.
Boy, you hit the nail on the head here. So, Frank, let's continue on that thought here. So if you siphon off billions of dollars from one agency, you're probably going to find it. But if you siphon off those hundreds of billions of dollars over 10 agencies, it's going to be less likely, because there's going to be a little bit in each agency, which is going to then add up to those hundreds of billions. Number one, talk about that. But number two, what Ben just talked about, when are people going to go to jail? People go to jail for a whole lot less. Let's look at, the Bernie Madoffs and all those scandals up there on Wall Street. They went to jail for a whole lot less. Martha Stewart, I mean, she had that insider trading with those little pieces of paper. She went to prison for about 10 or 11 months. These people need to go to jail, whether it's AOC, Adam Schiff, I mean, on down the whole J6 committee. Frank, go.
I would particularly look at elected officials, where their source of income is coming from. Early in my career as a young man, I had an appointed position in New York City government. And in that position, I had a driver who on the weekends worked in a deli delivering food. He was asked by New York City Department of Inspection to reveal his alternate source of income, working for the deli on the weekends. And yet an elected official who makes millions of dollars in profits apparently is immune from having to reveal their alternate source of income and what influence that may have had on their votes in Congress. Ben brought up an excellent example, AOC, who's now a multi-millionaire. The fact is, we don't know where those dollars came from. How much is that spread throughout the federal government? And how much of the contracts that are wasted in government are because someone in their part-time job, an elected official in a part-time job, wants to funnel money into that company that hires them for that part-time job that they have outside of Congress. I had the opportunity to fly once with the Air National Guard, and the pilot was showing me a coffee maker, which was on the flight, which cost some ridiculous amount of money. And he said, the first thing I want to do when my plane crashes is have a damn good cup of coffee. This coffee maker is supposed to be immune to survive a crash. Now you got to wonder whose congressional district, which didn't get a piece of other military contracts, made that crash-proof coffee maker in order to get a piece of the action. How much of that exists throughout all of government?
And probably the ultimate comment was, you know what? All this money spent on this coffee maker, I just want a good cup of coffee. This thing doesn't make squat, Ben.
Yeah, and look, let's be serious about what's been going on and how long this has been going on. It's easy to say all this was going on under Biden, and it was probably turbocharged under the Biden administration. But it was going on during the first Trump administration, during Barack Obama's administrations, during the Bush administrations. You can go back. On a smaller scale, it predates Bill Clinton. but the last 20 years, and I would say especially since 9/11, and this pivot we made away from small government towards just explosive growth in government, this has gotten completely out of hand. It's obvious that once Congress allocates money and funds a department, there has been zero oversight over that department. If you have a department head who doesn't care, who looks the other way, uh, even if the department head does care, the bureaucracy is so large, the amounts of money are so significant that no one can easily keep track of where all the spending's going. It's pretty easy to hide stuff, to tuck 100 million here and 100 million there and a billion here and there. It is, the numbers are that big, and I have said this on this show for years and years. You know how bad it is because the Washington suburbs, which used to be below average in wealth and below average in home prices when I was a kid, are now the wealthiest suburbs in this country, with a couple of exceptions like Beverly Hills and Palm Beach. The day we will be headed in the right direction is the day that the home prices start to crash in and around Washington, D.C., and you'll know we're starting to get a handle on it. But this is not an easy fix. This is not just Elon Musk sweeping through. He's going to get sunlight on this for the first time in a while. But requires massive amounts of change in government, of congressional involvement to stop and shut down this type of egregious spending and to drastically cut back on the budgets being sent to these various agencies.
Ben, I believe you're talking about Fairfax County in Virginia, which I think is up there in the Arlington, Virginia area and all of that. Through all of this, Frank, we're starting to understand the amount of corruption, though, under Joe Biden. Yes, I agree with Ben. This goes back to Obama. This goes back to George W. Bush. And when Bill Clinton and his vice president, when they cut about 377,000 jobs, it's like, oh my goodness, well, they cut them. Nobody thought a thing about it. We're going to trim down government. But after 9/11, they started to find out that there's some ways to start siphoning it off. And then, as I like the way Ben put that, turbocharged it under the late part of Obama, but then Joe Biden. Frank?
Yeah, you don't have to be an expert investigative bookkeeper to understand what's going on here. Let's follow the money. Look at all the money that's spent, for example, on green energy, and it's produced absolutely nothing. Look at the money that's been spent on infrastructure, and nothing really has been improved. The fact of the matter is, if we were living in a country where every problem had been solved, where our schools are perfect, our roads are perfect, no potholes, our military is as strong as it possibly could be, then you could say they spent a lot of money, but hey, they got something for it. We're in a situation where the money simply was spent and went into the pockets of the Democratic Party, Democrat candidates, and progressive organizations.
You make a good point there, Frank and Ben. It's like we got nothing to show for this.
Oh, we have only negative to show for this. This is negative spending. This has been primarily against the interests of the United States. And it is why the Democrats are screaming bloody murder and revealing themselves to be exactly the party that they are, a big grift on the American taxpayer. It is why they fight for progressive causes, for globalism. And frankly, if you dug into the EU and what's been going on there, it's the exact same thing that's been going on there. The World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and all of that ilk, they're all engaged in the exact same grift. They're stealing the money from the pockets of European taxpayers in the same way that it's been happening here. That's why they're all on board. That's why they've been working to create this global elite political class that is above suspicion. That's why they want to control the press in every possible way. Why you will see massive payments that were sent to places like MSNBC and CNN and PBS to make sure that They always printed the party line, and they were totally controlled. They've been a completely controlled political outlet for the left, and it is that bad. So it sounds like one big conspiracy theory. The problem is even the most imaginative conspiracy theorists have undershot what the reality is that's been going on in Washington and in Brussels the last 20 years.
Senator John Kennedy said it best. He says, we need more conspiracy theories because the old ones, they've all been proven to be true. And so they weren't conspiracy theories at all. This is Wayman Brunson and Venuccio Inside the News. You brought up Europe. J.D. Vance was in Munich. He lit it up. And I'll tell you what, people are loving it, what he did. And the people over there was even one politician from a country that cried because his whole thing is just blown up in his face. Wayman Brunson and Venuccio with Frank Venuccio, Ben Brunson, myself, Guy Wayman. We're going to take a time out. We'll be back. Welcome back to the second segment of Inside the News. Ben Brunson, Frank Venuccio. My name is Guy Wayman. I had an attorney, and he was a very good attorney, and he won. And he says, when I go into a case, I light it up. And that's what we're going to do, and that's exactly what J.D. Vance did, because he went over to Germany, and he started talking. They invited him over there, and they gave him the podium. They had no clue what was going to come out of his mouth, and so he's standing up there. And in 18 minutes, he lit it up. And I'll tell you what, they were shocked that came out of his mouth and literally exposed. I'll tell you what, Ben, I'll let you finish. Go.
Yeah, thank God someone finally said it. And it took the leadership of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance to go speak truth on European soil to the Europeans in a way that they really couldn't censor. And the truth is that all of these governments, France, Germany, and the UK, are on a path towards absolute fascist lockdown of free speech. They are at war with free speech in those countries. People are being arrested for the things they post on social media. The Germans admit that if you repost something, this is the same in the UK, by the way, on social media that is viewed as offensive, you're going to have police knock at your door and you may be sent to prison. And there are people in the UK that have gone to jail for extended periods because of the crime of what they stated on their social media posts, or even what they demonstrated on the streets of the UK. This is a left-wing war on free speech, progressive, totalitarian wishing regimes are always at odds with free speech. You have a bunch of ignorant idiots who challenge Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and try to say, oh, the Nazi regime weaponized free speech. What a complete twisting of history from reality. And it's too long a discussion to get into the history of it, but just total ignorance on the part of these left-wing journalists who apparently exist, continuation of the theme of the last segment, exist purely to be the propaganda arm of these progressive ideologues who are in power. And we need to, literally, we fought World War II against the type of ideology that is rampant in Europe right now, in Western Europe. Eastern Europe is very different, but in Western Europe, this self-loathing, this, as Douglas Murray has written about in his famous book, The Slow Death of Europe, this desire to turn their culture over to Islam. It is a completely self-destructive worldview, and all these things go hand in hand. And at least we have an administration who's willing to talk about it. Interestingly, Marco Rubio didn't back down and completely backed what J.D. Vance said. So the whole administration is on board, and it is causing, hopefully, leaders to elevate within Germany, within the UK and France, people like Marine Le Pen, and hopefully they will take power in the very near future. It's going to happen in Canada with Poilievre, and we need to see this happen throughout Europe if there's any hope of altering this self-destructive direction that Europe is on.
Okay, Frank, go.
There is a significant link, and Ben brought it up towards the end of his comments, between the tolerance of extreme Islamic immigration into Europe and the death of free speech. Many of these persecutions, I didn't say prosecutions, I said persecutions, of people exercising free speech is folks bringing up facts about what Islamic immigrants are doing in places like France, Germany, and the UK. Why have the leaders of Europe tolerated this? Because it fits very well into their programs, just as it is in the United States when the Biden and Obama administrations, particularly the Biden administration, encouraged massive immigration into the illegal immigration into the United States. Bringing in people with no background in freedom of speech and constitutional rights benefits the elites. They're a group of people potentially becoming voters who will not sit down, who will not oppose eliminating freedom of speech, not oppose the corruption because they come from corrupt societies themselves that the elites are doing. So illegal immigration and the assaults on individual rights are two sides of the exact same coin. Europe is on a path to self-destruction, and the elites like it that way because it guarantees their power. They know that a non-native population brought up in corrupt totalitarian societies will not oppose what they are doing. Two sides of the same coin.
Okay, Ben, let's keep moving on. Hamas, is it a double cross? Because we only got a couple prisoners here, a couple prisoners there, just enough to avoid the red line out there because Trump was going to lay it all out. Go.
Well, let's just start with the fundamental reality. Hamas has to be destroyed. End of story. All right. The good news is that Donald Trump knows that and Benjamin Netanyahu knows that. So we can go through whatever exercise we want to go through to try to get as many of the remaining hostages out as we can. I applaud the break in order to do that. We've saved the lives of a number of people so far, and hopefully we can get the rest out. But the inevitable outcome here is that Hamas, the Israelis have to go back into an active campaign to destroy Hamas in Gaza. And as close as much damage as they have done, unfortunately, there are a lot more Hamas fighters, and they're young men who come up and they take up arms as soon as they're of age. And unfortunately, there are a lot of young men in Gaza. So there is no future for Gaza with Hamas still in power, and the Israelis aren't going to allow it. And now the Israelis have an American administration that will stand by their side as they fight to destroy Hamas. So that is the future. And when the fighting commences is just a matter of timing.
All right. And Frank, we're going to get to you on the next segment here, but you mentioned Trump knows it. Netanyahu knows that Hamas needs to be destroyed. You know what, Ben? Hamas knows that they need to be destroyed, and that's why they're fighting for their very life, because they know that they're the problem because of where their ideals are. Oh, pretty much like the elites in Germany and Europe and stuff. They know deep in their soul that they're the problem and they need to be destroyed, but they're hanging on because they want to squish everybody else below them. And I'll tell you what, folks, I just started preaching there, but I didn't do the altar call or the offering plate yet. But this is Wayman Brunson and Venuccio. We're going to be back on the other side. Stick with us. Welcome back to our third segment of Inside the News. Frank Venuccio, Ben Brunson. My name is Guy Wayman. Frank Venuccio with the American Analysis of News and Media. You can find him at usagovpolicy.com. Ben Brunson, you can find him at benbrunson.com, and his books are at amazon.com. Those books are The Falstaff Enigma and Esther Sling. All right, let's get right to it. And Frank, you're up there in New York, and not because you're part of the problem, but there is a real mess with Eric Adams. And the Trump administration kind of revealed some of this. Pam Bondi is kind of revealing this, but it involves the mayor of New York. It involves the governor of New York. And it might even involve Bragg and Letitia James. It might even go, it's a cabal up there. Frank, go.
Yeah, let's put this in context. Throughout the current term, Alvin Bragg, the district attorney of Manhattan, has been basically siding with criminals, letting them go, not prosecuting them, knocking down serious crimes into minor misdemeanors. Despite the fact that the governor of the state of New York has the power to impeach, to take out of office the district attorney of Manhattan, she has never even hinted at the possibility of doing so. It's not even been brought up in polite conversation. But Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, had the temerity to negotiate with the sitting incumbent president of the United States. And now there are serious calls from the governor's office that she is considering impeaching Eric Adams, mayor of New York, for talking and negotiating with Donald Trump. It tells you how backwards the priorities are. We talked in the opening of the show about how all the funds of your tax dollars are going to fund progressive causes and Democrat Party candidates. In New York, we're seeing this on a smaller scale, where it's okay to destroy the city of New York through massive crime. But to simply talk with the President of the United States on areas of mutual interest is an impeachable offense for the elected mayor of the city of New York. This is how backwards the city is. This is how backwards our politics have become. Where this goes, it's questionable. At this point, there's some discussion that the governor is imminently considering impeaching Eric Adams, again, for simply negotiating with the President of the United States.
Okay, Ben, you're chomping at the bit. Go.
Yeah, all of this tells me that unfortunately for New York City, they continue on the wrong path. You know, at some point you think when you look at how bad it's gotten in California, how bad Oakland, San Francisco, LA have gotten, how many people are leaving, the net out migration. Imagine California with net out migration. You know, it's one of the most beautiful states, beautiful places you can conceive to live in. And yet it has net out migration. New York is the same. They're losing people right and left. They're losing the tax base in New York. You know, being replaced by illegal immigrants, you know, swamping the streets of New York City. You would think at some point, even the most ardent progressive would think, well, gee, maybe we ought to ameliorate some of these policies a little bit. Maybe we really don't want rampant crime all over the streets of New York City. We really don't want a subway that's back to the 1970s where you're taking your life, you're playing Russian roulette every time you go down and ride the subways. And yet, you know, as Frank just chronicled, you're not seeing that. You're seeing the doubling down. It's just like Gavin Newsom in California. It's never an admission that, gee, we've been on the wrong path for a long time. Let's change course a little bit. Let's tack to the right just a little bit. But you don't see that. It's a perpetually doubling down, and that's really bad news for New York. The future of New York is not great. For California, it's not great because it's hard to envision someone like Lee Zeldin actually winning the governorship and changing directions, or someone, you know, just going back to a Giuliani. I can't see a Giuliani coming and winning the mayoral race in New York City. Unfortunately, what I see is it's kind of like Chicago, where you had this rabid left winger replaced by someone far to the left of her, with Brandon Johnson coming in to be the mayor of Chicago. And, you know, I don't know how ugly it's got to get for these cities, but apparently it's going to get uglier before it gets brighter. And that's bad for America, because these cities are our leading cities and they need to be well managed. And unfortunately, they're being led in the wrong direction.
Okay, Frank, we've got new cabinet secretaries here: Noem, Duffy, Zeldin, Bondi, RFK Jr., and a whole lot more here. And I'm looking at Duffy. He comes out and with transportation says, I'm changing some things with emissions. And boom, you know, kind of takes the EVs offline here. Zeldin with the EPA, they found $20 billion of money parked at an outside bank. And so he says, hey, we clawed that back. Noem with agriculture, they're finding all kinds of discrepancies. And one of their main jobs is to get rid of foreign buying of our ag land, mainly China. Frank, go.
Yeah. One of the commonalities they all have, they're disruptors. They're looking at what's been going on over the past administration and realizing this is a systemic problem, a systemic problem of corruption, systemic problem of ideology that they are going to change. It's interesting when you look at the line votes. Many of these candidates were uh, got their position through party line votes. All the Republicans voted yes, all the Democrats voted no. It tells you how strong the Democrats are to protect their corruption, to protect things as they have they been destroying the country. I want to just go back to one thing in New York. Even some of the left-wing comedic outlets like Saturday Night Live are beginning to notice how bad New York is. Recently, there was a 50th anniversary show of Saturday Night Live, and they talked about the growth and corruption of New York, how New York in the 1970s was literally a hell on earth. And then, under about 8 years of Rudy Giuliani, a relatively conservative Republican mayor, New York became the greatest city in the world, the safest city in the world. Now, Giuliani is gone. We have liberal folks in charge again in New York City, and New York is going right back to the 70s. Even left-wing comic outlets are noticing this. And yet we see no movement in the Democratic Party to understand how deep the suffering of the people of New York is. I hope that the new cabinet secretaries, and I'm fairly confident that they will, are going to be able to do what they have to do in their respective departments to return the federal fisc and the federal emphasis on actually getting something done for the people of the United States, not just the Democratic Party and their progressive hanger-ons.
You know, Ben, we got about 20 seconds and we'll finish it up on the fourth segment. Go.
Yeah, we have done a full cycle in New York, 50 years back to the 70s. One of the biggest books of the 80s was Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities. It was about the great white defendant being prosecuted in New York City. And we're right back there with Daniel Perry. At least in Daniel Perry's case, it was a happy outcome. So there was hope then, and it got turned around, and hopefully that cycle will come back around for New York in the future.
This is Wayman, Brunson, and Venuccio Inside the News. Stick with us because we have the Brunson Files coming up, and part of our Picking Up the Pieces segment. We still have a whole lot more to share with you as we go inside the news. Thanks so much for joining us this week. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our fourth segment, our Picking Up the Pieces segment of Inside the News. Frank Venuccio, Ben Brunson. My name is Guy Wayman. We call this segment the Brunson Files, and we share Ben Brunson with you, and he spent a number of years up in Wall Street, up with the Solomon Brothers, and he's learned a lot about economy and economics and Wall Street and all that other kind of stuff. Ben, go.
Yeah, so I'm going to apply some of my economic training on this segment. Look, one of the big things you're seeing in the press right now, because we're laying off a handful of people out of the federal government. We haven't even made a dent in federal employment, and we need to reduce it by hundreds of thousands, in my opinion. But you're seeing the press, of course, run the stories every day about people who just lost their jobs and they can't believe it, and what are they going to do now? So I wanted to put this into just a little bit of perspective. When you hear the monthly employment numbers, which get announced every month by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they're much anticipated on Wall Street. Everyone reacts to them. And in a typical month, you hear a number like there's been a net job gain of 150,000 or 200,000. If it's a good month, it might be 300,000 of job gains or more. If it's a bad month, it might only be 50,000 of job gains. Here's the reality behind the numbers. Those are net numbers. On an average month, and I'm looking at the average for the last 4 years, from 2021 through 2024, on the average month in this country, 1.6 million people lose their jobs. 1.6 million every single month. That's been the average for the last 4 years. So that net it means that on the average, 1.7 million to 1.8 million people get hired again into new jobs. That is what you're hearing, the average. So when You get all of the hand wringing from the press, which you're just starting to see these stories. They're going to be 24/7 stories about young couples. I just saw one on CNN. They're interviewing a married young couple. They both worked for the government. They both just lost their job. And of course, it's woe is me. What are we going to do? Well, here's what you're going to do. You're going to buff up your resume and go find a freaking job in the private sector. That's what you're going to do, like people have done forever. You got to get off your rear end. You might have to move out of Washington, D.C., but you got to go find a private sector job. And that's the reality. So don't fall for this. Again, in the private sector, 1.6 million people every single month lose their job on average in this country. That's close to 20 million per year on average. That's the reality. That's been the reality for years and years and years. That is how dynamic our capitalist system is. It must be that way for the system to work properly. So the government taking down their jobs by a few 100,000 over the next year, it will be, the earth has come to an end as far as the press is concerned, but it's absolutely nothing compared to the reality of the private sector.
They actually found out that the earth is flat. And that's the whole problem with this, you know. And they want to decentralize. They want to get people out of Washington, D.C. and start placing them all around the country in other locations so that it's not all centralized there in D.C. land. Frank?
Let's take a harder look at those job numbers. The fact of the matter is, when we go through the Biden administration, one of the things they like to tout was that they created X amount of jobs. Then you drill down, and it's always important to drill down the top line numbers. If you look at the job growth under the Biden administration, what little there was of it, a hefty percentage was to people being employed by the federal government. That's not a net gain for the country's finances. That's a net loss for the nation's finances because you got to pay those folks. It's not adding anything. Another percentage went to illegal aliens, which did absolutely nothing for the American population. So the job numbers that we saw during the Biden administration were, for the most part, a total fraud and a total anchor, not a total benefit for the American economy.
And then there's people on Social Security who are 150 years old, Ben.
And one that's over 300 years old. We learn something new every day. Look, Frank just hit the nail on the head. The reality is, when you dig behind the numbers, for the last 30 months, the private sector trends have been negative. And this has been a theme on this show for the last 30 months, pointing out that we're reporting GDP growth of 2% or so, but that is all being driven by government spending, not by the private sector growth. The wealth creation comes from the private sector growing, not from government growing. If government growth created wealth, we'd all be speaking Russian now. The Soviet Union would have kicked our rear ends instead of the other way around. So government growth is a net negative. Frank said it perfectly. It is not positive to have new government jobs. It's a negative. They are a leech on the productive class, which is the private sector. And so we have a real issue. And I think we're going to find that the problem that Trump has, and why he really has to take advantage of this honeymoon, is that as he shuts down government, it'll be a while before the private sector really revives again. And the tax law that needs to get passed ASAP and make the tax cuts permanent, the Trump tax cuts from the first administration permanent, is absolutely vital to the Republican Party and the Trump administration having a positive view by the American people.
Well, we got to get out of here because we're over time. So we'll be right back, and stay with us. There's more to come. Welcome back to our final segment of Inside the News. We're going to put a bow on the program here. We've got Ben Brunson, Frank Venuccio. My name is Guy Wayman. Okay, Frank, one of our favorite subjects is the media. We talk about this. We talk about the press corps. It is interesting, the same person in the White House press room, Caitlin Collins, she's still a thorn in the side. She keeps on going over. She keeps wanting to push over her bounds. But then probably the biggest loser of the media over the weekend was Margaret Brennan of CBS. She was trying to push some things and trying to push a point, and Marco Rubio, these cabinet nominees, and what is remarkable, each one of them, they're empowered to speak the truth. And we have not seen that from these guys a lot. They've always told the company line. Well, the company line is speak the truth. Marco Rubio said, well, that's not true. It wasn't this that caused, it wasn't Nazism, and it wasn't this that caused it. And he just put it right to her. Brennan had egg on her face, Frank.
The left used to say, speak truth to power. Now, when you speak truth to power, the left says, oh, shut up, will you already? The Marco Rubio exchange with CBS was fascinating because it really outlined the utter ignorance of history that the media is operating from, absolute ignorance of facts. The CBS reporter claimed that the Nazis used freedom of speech to take over, when in fact it was precisely the opposite. The tragedy of it is this isn't a one-off. This isn't just one example. You see this in college classrooms. You see this in lower schools. You see this reported repeatedly throughout the media. A total ignorance of facts, a total ignorance of history. It's destroying the discourse in our country. One of the Fox reporters does a man in the street type interview, and he asked very basic questions. Who was the first president of the United States? Who was the president during the Civil War? And the crowd struggles to give appropriate answers that you would think any 6-year-old would be able to give. The triumph of ignorance, thanks to the left, has been so vast and so significant, it has become a predominant danger to our society.
Okay, Ben, truth to power? Well, no, Rubio, he really just said it straight up.
Well, that's because Trump picks the right people for his cabinet. So he's got strong individuals like Marco Rubio speaking for him. Look, it is apparent that the baby boom generation was the last generation to be taught history at all in school. So we're at least a couple generations now, if not 3 generations, into a complete absence of history education. And I have long held that it is impossible to understand where the world is today if you don't have a fairly thorough understanding of history of the 20th century, which shaped our planet and the geopolitics that we are living through right now. And unfortunately, it's just not taught anymore in school. So you have all these whole generation that can't tell you who George Washington was, have no idea who Franklin Delano Roosevelt was, or when World War II was fought, or who was fighting who during World War II. So the level of ignorance is really through the roof, and you see it embodied in people like Margaret Brennan, because these are the people who now have jobs in the journalism. So it's a sad state of affairs, but that's what it is.
Hot button topics. Frank, go.
Admiral Sam Papio, the Indo-Pacific commander of U.S. forces, has said that China is now engaged in every possible training step it could take before an invasion of Taiwan. We are being warned. All the elements are there, and yet the media, for the most part, refuses to discuss the issue.
And okay, Ben, your hot button topic.
I'm going to continue on the same theme. Lucky Palmer, who is a young entrepreneur who built Oculus and sold it to Meta, and now has a growing defense company called Anduril, went on a podcast and made the following claim: that the Chinese shipbuilding capacity right now is 350 times that of the United States. 350 times that of the United States. Now, if you don't realize it, if we get into a war with China in the Pacific, it will have a lot of the elements of World War II in the Pacific. You've got to have a large fleet to project power and to fight a war against China over islands in the Pacific like Taiwan. And China covets a lot of the Pacific, much the way Japan did. So this is a huge issue.
All right. We want to thank our guys for another great show this week. Frank, thanks.
Looking forward to seeing you all next week.
And Ben?
Thank you. Thank you to our listeners.
Absolutely. We want to thank all the listeners on down the line and all of our radio affiliates. This is Wayman Brunson and Venuccio Inside the News. Join us again next week when we do go once again inside the news.
You're listening to Wayman Brunson and Venuccio Inside the News.